All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Phil Gallagher. I run ThrabenU University, a site for legacy, death, and taxes. And yesterday, I decided, I'm a little behind on format points. Maybe I should play in a challenge, and I won the whole thing. Spoilers if you haven't already heard, but I did the thing, and I did the thing with Red Prison. So I don't have to worry about format points anymore. I got 35 for winning that challenge, so I'm qualified for that sweet, sweet event, whatever they're calling it. The quarterly legacy Magic Online thingy. I don't know. There's probably Mythic in its name. There's Mythic in everything's name now. But this is the deck list that I played. So in doing my research for what I wanted to play, I looked at 3 lists. There were 2 lists from the Legacy Challenge, and then I also saw Zach Turgian's list on the source. And this list was within 1 card of what I wanted to play. So I just took it and ran with it and didn't look back. This was Budakov's list from either 1 or 2 weeks ago. I believe he got 6th place in a Legacy Challenge with this, and it was exactly where I wanted to be. As far as this deck list goes, it's a little non-traditional for the way the Red Prison builds have been recently, but I think it's very good. So, in the past, the Red Prison builds have been a little closer to the prison side of the spectrum, whereas this is more aggressive. So in the past, it's been very common to see both main deck Karn and Ensnaring Bridge, and you go for a little bit of a later game. But if you look at what this version is doing, we have Rabble Masters and Legion War Boss and 4 Trinispheres and 2 Lotus Petals. So we're shifting the curve lower and making it into a very aggressive deck. It is still a prison deck by its nature. We have 12 lock pieces, right? So we have the Blood Moons, the Magus of the Moons, the Trinispheres, and the Chalices. So we're still clearly in the prison archetype, but we're putting the Stomp back in Moon Stompy here. And I know the Lotus Petal might look sketchy because it's not something that this deck has played in the past, but let me tell you, the degenerate things that I got to do by having both Soul Lands and Chrome Mox and Lotus Petal are absolutely disgusting. I'm going to show off some replays of some of my favorite moments from the event. I didn't do a live recording, but luckily MTGO saves replays, so we can go back and watch some of the stuff that I did, because it's disgusting. The sideboard has one card that I consider really not to be a stock consideration at all, and that's Hanwar Garrison. This is just Rabble Master number 9. So whenever this thing attacks, you create 2 1/1 red human creature tokens that are tapped and attacking. So this is just another aggressive card. And you might ask, why do I want that? And the answer is, sometimes your main deck cards suck. There are a lot of times where, like, say your opponent is playing a deck that has 10 plus basics. Your Blood Moon and Magus of the Moons are probably awful. So you just need stuff to board in. And having one more aggressive creature in the sideboard oftentimes really helps to make your sideboard numbers work out. While Scab Clan Berserker is really for like the combo and control matchups, Hanwar Garrison can often just come in versus anything where you have a slot to fill. And so I really like that as a sideboard card. I don't know that I want to like promote it to the main deck or anything, but I brought it in way more often than I expected. So I said I was going to run 74 of the 75. The only card I was on the fence on, and my event results kind of indicated that this was the loosest slot, was I'm not really sure that this Grafdigger's Cage is necessary as Graveyard Hate piece number 5. I kind of thought that this should be an ensnaring bridge to help improve, like, say, the Snake and Show matchup, which is kind of hard, or maybe another Abrade, or Goblin Crater Maker, or Sorcerer's Spyglass. I think there's more utility in having another flexible card here rather than a very specific hate card. You also can run into problems where, like, you play a Chalice on 1 because it's great in the matchup, and then you draw a Cage. And I'll show one spot where that happened to just kind of like show off how awkward it can be. All right, so I probably need to answer another question here. Like, Phil, you're like the D&T guy, or one of the D&T guys. Why didn't you register that deck for the event? Like, you're probably way better playing D&T than you are playing Red Prison, so what gives? Great question. So I got this question a lot, and I got a lot of flack on Reddit for not playing D&T. Here's the short answer. Based on the matches that I was seeing online and the sort of like metagame numbers from the past couple of weeks, I was not actually convinced that D&T was well positioned for this specific weekend. That doesn't mean I think it's a bad deck right now. I just did not think this was the weekend for it. Yeah. Okay, I should probably amend that. I always register D&T to big paper events. So, technicality. I thought you too got shot the Bob. All right. So, my sort of reasoning for submitting Red Prison was I really thought that combo was going to be absolutely everywhere in this event. You know, there's been a lot more depths online, more Sneak and Show, more Ant, and I wanted something that had more turn 1 and 2 answers to combo than D&T does. You know, D&T leans very, very heavily on Thalia, and then has Chalice for post-sideboard games, but I wanted to hedge game 1 very strongly against combo. And I considered playing something like the Cleric Stompy deck, but I wasn't 100% convinced of its power level after like playing a league or two with it. So I fell to Red Prison. It's a deck that I've played a lot in the past. If you've been following for the past year, you know, you've probably seen me stream with this, I don't know, maybe like 10 or so times. I really enjoy the deck, and I think it's very, very powerful. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of give you the 30-second rundown of how the event went, and then I'm going to walk round by round through the event and sort of show off some of the cool and degenerate things that I and my opponents did. Yeah, I miss playing Magus of the Moon. Like, it'll be very clear how ridiculous the Blood Moon effects are right now once I show off a couple of replays. It's a well-positioned card. If you've been hanging around the channel, like you know that I believe very strongly that Chalice of the Void is probably the best card in Legacy, or at least like one of the best cards in Legacy. And so just being able to like maybe more consistently than any other deck in the format power that out on turn 1 is crazy. Yeah, go shut the Bob. I should mention that. So 2 of my opponents did post their videos of the matchups that we played. So Bryant Cook of the Epic Storm pushed out his, and so did Spatula of the Ages, and I played that player twice, and they were playing Enchantress. So if you want to see some of my matchups from the other side, they are available. The test match maybe isn't the most interesting thing in the world. I'll be honest with you. But the Enchantress match is kind of cool, especially the first one. You get to see my opponent play around some Trinispheres really well. Yeah, all right, so let's start looking at some matches. I don't really intend this to be a long stream because I kind of want to keep this to a reasonable length that someone who wants to like watch a tournament report can read. So I'm not going to show off like every match or like even all of every match that I'm going to show you some of, but I want to show you why I registered this deck and why I feel like it's so powerful. Because like obviously it carried me to a win. So let's see why I like this. All right, winning the die roll. Great when you're playing this deck. One of the hardest things about this... Okay, Lord Darkview. Replays work if you're not playing certain cards. If you are playing cards that require a choice, like Phyrexian Revoker, I don't really know that they're consistent. So one of the hardest things about this deck is deciding whether or not you want to keep an opening hand. This is a hand that can produce a turn 2 Magus, which is fine. But if you produce the turn 2 Magus, your next play is turn 4 P&K, which is pretty medium. So when I'm on the play, I'm fine with mulliganing something like this. Yeah, I wasn't on Spyglass, so my replays work. Okay. This is one of the most degenerate possible opening hands that this deck could have. And we get to scry a sweet card to the top, a Legion Warboss. So in case this math isn't obvious to you, we get to Chrome Mox the Blood Moon to make 1 mana. We get to play a City of Traders for 2 mana, exile a Simian Spirit Guide for another mana. Right, I'm just going to whack the play button, see how quickly this goes. Make a Chandra, plus the Chandra for 2 mana, and make a Chalice of the Void. So, like, just pausing that there, how absurd is this? It's turn 1, I have 3 mana in play that sticks around until the next turn that lets me cast my 3-drop aggressive creature. I have a Planeswalker, I have a Chalice on 1. This deck is insane. Now, my opponent does counter with a relatively good start. They get to start off with a Bob. So they go and play a Bob. I kill it with Chandra. Yeah, I know, this is just so sexy, right? And then, like, we play a Legion Warboss. And this card's ridiculous. I make a Goblin token. I get to attack. It'll be a 2/2 next turn. All right, you punishing fire my Chandra. There's still this monster on the board. So, like, Legion Warboss attacks, makes another Goblin, turns one of these into a 2/2. And, like, let's just pause here. Like, it's turn 3. My opponent's at 14 already. This board is hyper-threatening. And against a lot of normal decks, having a Chalice and a Trinisphere in play is just like GG, nothing you can possibly do about it. Now, Loam can play around that a little bit, but, like, just look at this. It's just murder. And they quickly die from here. So my round 1 opponent was Hedron Crab. They were playing Loam, and I took that down in 2. So round 2, I'm going to get paired against Elves. Let's take a look at what happens in game 1 here. Sorry, there's going to be a lot of, like, awkward shuffling around of windows tonight. Alright, so, it's turn 1. Look at all the sweet things that I can do. Like, just take a second to appreciate this, chat. I can Chalice on 1, I can Trinisphere on 1, I can Magus of the Moon on 1. If I wanted, I could even Legion Warboss on 1. This is nuts, right? So the play that I decided to make was Trinisphere, and my opponent conceded. That was game 1 of this match. Yeah, I know. Like, this is just absurd, right? It feels like I am cheating. Like, this feels like Ancient Tomb, Lotus Petal, Show and Tell, and I win the game. And this sort of start is not uncommon for playing this deck. I am not exaggerating when I say this. I timed it, and I kept coming out of my room at like every 10 minutes, and I was like, yep, 1 in 10 minutes, 1 in 10 minutes, 1 in 9 minutes. The majority of my rounds, I think my first 5 rounds all finished in under 10 minutes. And I think the longest it took me to finish a round playing this deck was 25 minutes. It was very refreshing. Okay. But this can't just be me always, like, going and winning the matches. I do want to just admit that I lost some. So, for example, let's look at game 2 real quick of this same match. Let's show the Elves being the bully that Elves is. This was pretty neat. Gotta balance it out by playing some miracles to get that time back. Yeah, I see where you're going with that. Alright, so I have a pretty sweet hand, like, against what I don't really know what deck they are yet. But starting with, like, either Magus of the Moon or Trinisphere is just, like, gonna be an absurd start against any fair deck, right? So my opponent Green Suns, I get to go, and then I play a Trinisphere. I've got him relatively locked down, and then this happens. Was the worst possible thing that could happen. My opponent had Progenitus. And so, in short order, I just, like, die to this in 2 attacks. There are some things that the Red Prison deck isn't really, like, well-equipped to beat, and a Progenitus is one of them. I have 2 Ensnaring Bridges in the sideboard, but otherwise, like, I can't touch that card. Even some of the fringe things that you could play, like, say, Chaos Warp, don't deal with that bugger. Alright, so it's round 2. I'm currently 2-0. I do end up going on to beat Elves. I actually start out the tournament 6-0, and I'll take my first loss in round 7. So we get paired in round 3. We're going to get paired against Ant. Let's see how the games go. We're going to watch games 1 and 2 here. They go quick. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the whole point of Progenitus, right? Alright, so I'm on the draw. Again, like, look at these frickin' insane hands. Like, I have the potential to turn 1 Magus or turn 1 Chalice. This is just great. So my opponent plays a Thoughtseize. Great, they get to take the Chalice. I still get to Moonman on turn 1. So even when your opponent has Disruption for the best card in your hand, you still do the thing on turn 1. My opponent was lucky to have a non-basic. But, like, let's just consider how the rest of this game is going to go. Oh. Or, instead of just playing a clock, we can just top deck an insane hate card. The haymakers in this deck are brutal. And the top decks that you can get, even when your hand gets, like, torn apart by opposing discard, like, they still have to live in fear off the top. Now, let's say I didn't draw this Trinisphere. I just play this Goblin Rabblemaster and have my opponent dead in 3 turns. This is the power of this deck. This is why I registered this. Alright, so let's watch the beginning of game 2. I won't watch the whole thing, but you'll kind of get it quickly. Alright. This has double Chalice of the Void into Goblin Rabblemaster as a curve. there's this Grafdigger's Cage, which I didn't really want to be playing, and I'm going to remove if I play the deck list again. That's going to run into some tension with the Chalice of the Void, but it doesn't even matter. Like, let's just kind of watch how this goes, right? So, opponent kind of expects that they should be safe if they get to go and play out something like a discard spell on turn 1. That should give them time, but it doesn't here. I get to play a Chalice on 0 and a Chalice on 1 on my turn 1 after getting discarded. Then I get to follow up with Goblin Rabblemaster, which will be a 3 or a 4 turn clock. You know, we don't really need to watch it out from here, because, like, this card just murders them on its own. But this is where I'm at. What will you replace the cage with next time around? I think it should be Ensnaring Bridge, Abrade, Goblin Crater Maker, or Sorcerer Spyglass, maybe. It kind of, like, depends on what specifically you want to hedge against. But I only brought it in, like, 2 or 3 times throughout the event, which is a fine number for, like, playing 10 rounds. But it didn't feel particularly impactful. And since I have so many great hate cards, like the Chalices and the Trinispheres, I feel like I can drop a card versus Reanimator and still be fine. Alright, so that's round 3. Currently 3-0. Next up, I play against Balenciaga and Boba. I didn't write down what they were playing. I'll remember in just a second here. Is this the... Oh, I think this was the blue-white-red, like, Delver Blade deck. Alright, so let's look at this opening hand. Oh, wait. It's insane again. This is, like, maybe the worst opening hand I've shown, and we still turn 1 Blood Moon. Like, there's not much else to say, right? And this is a legacy challenge. This is not like I'm just, like, playing, like, random leagues versus people, you know? The challenges have a relatively good set of players in them, and just the power level of my deck just felt so much better than everything else my opponents were playing. I did drop a game this round. In game 2, and my opponent was on the play. They got to, I think, fetch out a couple of basics, and I had trouble beating a Batterskull. Blood Moon earned a lot of concessions. When you're playing 4 of them main deck, and you can play it on turn 1 consistently, it's pretty sweet. Alright, so, currently 4-0 going into round 5. In round 5, I played against Enchantress. I'm not going to show any of the replay of this one, because the video is available from my opponent's side. So if you're interested in seeing a relatively interesting set of Red Prison versus Enchantress, Spatula of the Ages pushed out a video. Again, that is Spatula of the Ages. It's linked on Reddit. It was kind of interesting. It's the Living Wish Enchantress build. Alright, Julian, I'll show a little bit of game 1, and then just kind of talk about what happened. But the match goes very long. Okay. So I end up taking a mulligan and keep one of my sort of, like, weakest hands of the tournament right here. So I can't really objectively do anything, but I'm going to get a turn 2 Trinisphere, which is not still. So even though this opener was weak, I'm great. So I make a Trinisphere. Now, against most decks, this should be the end. Like, just an early Trinisphere when your opponent usually has 1 mana, just, like, buys you 2 turns, and your cards like Legion Warboss and Goblin Rabblemaster just, like, take over the game. It was my thought that I should play the Trinisphere, and then my opponent just O-rings my mana source and drops a Serra's Sanctum. And this sort of locks me under my own Trinisphere for a little while. and gives my opponent time to set up. I whiff a couple of draws, and then my opponent eventually ends up using a Living Wish to get an Emrakul and just casts it off the back of Sarah's Sanctum. I wasn't really expecting my opponent to be able to, like, play around the Trinisphere so well, and it was possible that I should have just, like, slammed the War Boss and say, like, find an Elephant Grass or die. I'm not 100% sure if that was a misplay or not, but I definitely thought about it after the fact. I was very impressed by his ability to play through Trinisphere. So I end up taking that one and moving on to 5-0, although I lose game 1 very handily. All right, so round 6 I get paired against, of course, Bentley, of course. Nice to see you. All right, so round 6 I get paired against a very good grinder. I get paired against Gold Ducat, Daniel Gottschall, I believe. So let's look at the opener here. So I'm on the draw this time, and I have a potential for a turn 1 Chalice, followed by, you know, in all likelihood, a turn 2 Blood Moon effect. So, like, this is a keep. My opponent has mulliganed. Feel like I'm in a good spot. And here, my opponent makes an awesome play. My opponent thought sees a handful of amazing cards and goes, I'm going to take that Chrome Mox. So let's see how it plays out for them. I go Mountain Go. They go Crop Rotation for Urborg, Depths, Hexmage, 2020. I lost that one. This is the quality of start that it took to beat me quickly. There weren't a lot of hands like this on the other side of the table. That's about the best that Depths could hope for, is like a turn 2 2020 with a piece of discard, and that beat me. But short of that, it was hard. Did 2 Petal seem low, or was that about right? Seems fine to me, just curious. So the deck traditionally does not play Lotus Petal. It usually just plays the Soul Lands and then the Moxen. 2 Lotus Petals seemed good to me. Like, you definitely want the mana, you definitely want to be able to do the degenerate things consistently, but if you play too many of them, you start tripping over your own Trinispheres, and you start to have just too much mana and not enough threats. So you should treat the Lotus Petals as, like, Moxen number 5 and 6, like, conceptually, rather than, like, Petals 1 and 2, just because, like, they're the redundancy. So you want more of that effect, but you don't necessarily want to go up to the full play set. If you want to go up to the full play set, you'd have to, like, start doing things like dropping Hazaret and P and K, and those are going to be really good in your more mid-rangey matchups. All right, so that was sort of an example of what happened in round 6. After that, I essentially just, like, I think I mooned him out of the game 2 games in a row very quickly. So going into the final round, I'm 6-0, which means I am locked for top 8, and I will probably be either first or second seed, although that doesn't really matter on Magic Online. And then I go into round 7. And round 7, I get paired against Sneak and Show. The deck building decisions that I made definitely made me worse against Sneak and Show than traditional Red Prison. Because with traditional Red Prison, a lot of times, like, you drop a bridge, and then you can steal game 1s really, really easily. Thank you for the bits, Bentley. I am doing the opposite of making combo great again, though. As a Storm lover, you're not going to like what I do in game 3 of the finals. I'm going to show that one. It's a gem. Okay, so again, not having bridges in game 1 really is going to make me weaker against this deck. And one of the things I like about Sneak and Show as a deck is that it is relatively good at ignoring some pieces of hate. So you can play a Chalice or a Blood Moon, and they just kind of go like, yeah, I guess that's annoying, but I'll tap 3 lands and cast this Show and Tell, and everything's okay. So which game did I want to show? Let's take a look at game 1 of this. Alright, so I mulligan a weak hand, and let's take a look at what I keep here. And I'm showing this off to just sort of show you the sort of hands that are bad that you still keep. So this does not have an early hate piece, and this currently also does not have the ability to play more than 1 card. However, Legion Warboss, on its own, is a hell of a clock. So the first turn is what? The first turn is 1, then the second turn is 5, then the third turn is 7. So like the damage on this ramps up quickly. And when you play a second one, all of a sudden things are terrifying. So if I draw a red source, this just becomes like a 3-turn clock on its own. Keep. This is fine. So like I scry an Ancient Tomb to the bottom, I go and I do my thing, and I go all in on 1 Goblin Boy. Let's kind of see how this goes. My opponent doesn't do anything. I whiff on my land. It's fine. Hit him for 5. So now we'll see my opponent just like do some traditional blue deck stuff of cantripping a little bit. I whiff again. It's fine. Attack in again. And now my opponent goes down to 7 and is facing lethal. And this works out for me. My opponent show and tells, tries to go off, and then I get them with Trinisphere. Bentley, I think I said something along the lines of, yeah, but I'm doing everything to work against that. I'm making combo not great again. So even when you can't necessarily like cast your hate pieces, sometimes it still works out. Note that even if they just like dumped in a creature, an Ensnaring Bridge or something could buy me the time that I needed to overpower them with just like Goblin tokens or something like that. So this is not unreasonable. So I end up taking game 1, but I lose games 2 and 3. I think I lose 1 game to a sweeper that removes my pressure, and then I lose another game to just getting like 22'd by Grizzlebrand and Emrakul off a sneak attack, I think. So I'm 6-1 in the Swiss. Wins against Loam, Elves, Ant, Blue-White-Red Delver Blade, Enchantress, Green-Black Depths, and then a loss to Sneak and Show. Looking at the top 8, it is just like absolutely stacked in my favor. It is full of combo decks, which is where I want to be. So in the first round of top 8, I get paired against Spatula of the Ages again, and I have another set versus Enchantress. Learned a little bit the first time around, sequence a little bit better, and take that one down, I think in 2. Yeah, take that one down in 2 pretty easily. And then I get paired against Bryant Cook on Tess. And it's a nail-biter. You can watch the matchup from his side on his YouTube channel. And shameless plug for him. He's like 40 followers away from hitting the 1,000 follower threshold that he needs in order to monetize his YouTube channel. So if you enjoy Storm content, or even just Legacy content in general, check out his stuff. It is very, very good. Sort of an interesting thing happens in round 9. So to just like show off just the first turn, because like it's relatively uneventful. So like I know I'm playing against him, so I mulligan into Oblivion. I mulligan to 3. Just like trying to find like literally any hate card that I can play out. And like he's probably internally fist bumping, going like, yeah, mulling for Thalia, mulling for Thalia. And he fetches a non-basic. And I'm just like, come on, off the top, mana. And I get to turn 1 Blood Moon after mulling to 3. This deck, man, it can really do some stuff. Yeah, I legitimately felt like a monster in playing this deck for this tournament. Like, I had amazing pairings in my favor. I just felt like I was playing the best deck in the format, and no one else had gotten the memo. Like, I do want to just mention that I did get extremely favorable pairings. Like, there were other people telling me about how they played against, like, Delver and Miracles all day, and I just, like, ate my way through all of the combo decks. Alright, so I make it to the finals, and I'm going, and I'm playing against Ant. Let's watch games 1 and 3 here. So let's take a look at another like very typical Red Prison hand. Oh, I have turn 1 Chalice of the Void. I guess that's pretty good against Ant. And I didn't know what they were playing at the time. I kind of thought they were playing Reanimator. And then I top deck the land I need to play a Rabble Master. So I get to play a Rabble Master into another Rabble Master, and it's just disgusting. So, like, this is cool, too. Like, what is this? Turn 3, I get to, like, Chandra plus make a mana, make second Rabble Master, and just crash in for, like, absolutely stupid amounts of damage. Like, this is this deck. This is why I wanted to play this for the event. Alright. So, you might say, alright, Phil, but where do the real decisions of this deck come? Because it's looked like a lot of these have been like autopilot easy decisions. Alright. Here's a fun one. I'm on the play for game 3. Are you willing to stake your entire tournament on one Hasty Boy? These are the sort of decisions where you have to, like, go, like, how all in am I? And the answer is, yeah, obviously, I'm keeping this hand. You have to be willing to just commit to the first hate card that you play in some of these matchups and go, like, hey, is this good enough? If not, we're gonna, you know, pray to Thalia and Keranos and the other acceptable deities and see what the top decks give us. So this is a hand that, like, gets to go, like, Mountain Petal, Scab Clan attack, turn 1, and then turn 2, really hope you draw something that you can play off Ancient Tomb, and go from there. So, like, let's kind of see how this goes. So we go land, Petal, Scab Clan. Attack, make it renowned, and now it's, like, basically a one-sided Eidolon of the Great Rebel. Let's just kind of watch how much damage this thing does. So opponent is at 11 from this one card already. 10. 8. Attack. Fiery Confluence them. And I win the tournament. That is a turn 3 Goldfish from a prison deck. Just, like, kind of let that sink in. Yeah. Right? Like, what was my opponent supposed to do? Like, they made the finals of an event. They're very clearly a skilled player. They sent me a message, you know, saying that, you know, they were good games, but, like, my God, Scab Clan Berserker was a monster. Alright, so, like, maybe it's not, like, the most technical of goldfishes, but, like, they're dead turn 3. Thank you. Alright, so, like, kind of recapping and going back to the deck list again. This deck was very much built with combo in mind. Maxing out on like Chalice, Trinisphere, and the ability to play it early by playing the Lotus Petals. When my primary game plan of lock them out with one of these 12 cards was not a thing, or didn't work for some reason, the ability for Goblin Rabblemaster and Legion Warboss to take over the game should not be underestimated. And, we have Honorary, another playset of powerful idiots in the sideboard with the 3 Scab Clan Berserkers and the Hanowar Garrison. So this deck is great if you are a fan of, like, Death and Taxes and decks that attack from a slightly different angle and really hate on the blue decks. This is probably about as good as you're going to get right now. Highly, highly recommend this deck list. There's very few changes that I would consider making. If you kind of want to tune the deck list a little bit and you want to make some adjustments, if you want to go slower and add some of the prison elements back in, you usually cut 2 Trinispheres and the Lotus Petals, and then potentially like Hazoret and P&K. So like if you want to do some adjustments, these are some of the slots you can mess with. You can also not play Legion Warboss and just play Rabblemaster if you want, but these are sort of the adjustable slots, and you can slot things in like Ensnaring Bridge and Karn into these slots. You can also play more copies of Fiery Confluence in the main deck. Yeah, so the Fiery Confluence is really good against all the mid-range decks, where it like serves as a sort of like sweeper primarily and artifact answers secondarily, and just 6 to the dome tertiarily. The card is absolutely great. It's very powerful, but I'm going a little all in on my early cards, and I'm playing less of the long game. So if you're just trying to have your opponent dead by turn 4, Fiery Confluence matters a lot less. I do have the 3rd in the sideboard, and the 4th definitely would be a consideration. But I think 4 of this card is much more important in the 4X main deck Ensnaring Bridge builds. All right, Bentley, I'll see you around. As far as the sideboard goes, I felt very good about the sideboard. Like, there's some things to consider, like this cage should probably be something else. Like, you can have the conversation of, like, is a Braid better than Goblin Cratermaker? And that's a really tough call. Cratermaker is more flexible, gives you a little bit more game against things like Emrakul, because the Sneak and Show decks are hard, answers opposing equipment. But a Braid is just, like, always a 2-mana investment, whereas Cratermaker, like, sometimes has to be a 3-mana investment in order to kill the thing you want. And that 2 versus 3 mana is oftentimes, like, the deal breaker as to whether or not you can cast it on a turn. And against something like Delver, having this earlier as a removal spell is much more important than the flexibility. So I don't think it's clear-cut. Also, one of the decision-making processes that I didn't talk about, just kind of like due to the nature of like how I'm doing this sort of recap, is I didn't talk about sideboarding at all. And one of the things about sideboarding with this deck is that you make play-draw adjustments a lot. Like, a lot, a lot, a lot. In many matchups, the game plan of let's moon them and win the game on turn 1 really only works if you're on the play, because when you're on the draw, they have the opportunity to go and fetch up a basic land. So many times, like, your moons get worse on the draw. So on the draw, you might end up just, like, boarding in a bunch more creatures in order to just, like, have a few less hate pieces, but try to get them dead quicker. Similarly, in some matchups, like, Trinisphere will become much, much worse on the draw. So you do a lot of small adjustments of that nature, and I mentioned that because I think a lot of people get in their mind, like, this is how I sideboard for a matchup, but this is a deck where the play draw really does matter quite a bit. Okay, I want to open it up to the chat now. Chat, what questions do you have about sort of my tournament, this deck, or any of the sort of general decisions that went into like playing this deck or constructing the list? Thraben University actually has a couple articles on Red Prison from last year, so I don't even think I need a separate university. It's more like one of those, oh, not a gen ed class. I want to say a flex slot class, but that's clearly using magic lingo in a college environment, which doesn't work. I'm just like, elective, thank you, Lord Darkview. That's the word I wanted, elective class. Okay. Is playing this at a big paper event on the table? It's not something that I would probably have the cojones to register for a GP. For an event where like anything goes, who knows what can happen on day one, I would probably just default to playing Death and Taxes. I do think this deck is very good. I would not be uncomfortable submitting this for a paper tournament, but in a GP that I'm going to travel 6 hours to go and play, I would probably stake everything on D&T rather than this deck. Does Arc-like Phoenix give this deck trouble? I did not actually play any games against Arc-like Phoenix in the tournament or in my testing leading up to it. So the answer is I do not know. I can speculate, though. I think I'd be pretty good at stopping them from comboing off when I'm on the play. I think when I'm on the play and I can like moon them, Trinosphere them, chalice them, I think one of those quickly that like doesn't go and get countered is pretty likely to slow them down so that they can't combo off quickly, and I think that my Rabble Masters and War Bosses can probably take over the game. In the post-sideboard games, I'm going to be picking up Leyline, meaning that they can't combo off. But at the same time, they're also going to be picking up things like Abrades, Culligan's Commands, Echoing Truth to answer some of my permanent-based hate. So there might be more game to it than is immediately apparent in the post-sideboard games. Yeah. Of note, if my opponent can just like get to 3 mana, cast Buried Alive, they can just like ram 3 spells that get countered into a Chalice and combo off that way. So I imagine the Red Prison deck would be favored, but I can't say that with authority without playing the matchup. All right, chat. What other questions do you have for me about this? Yeah, I'm still not certain that the optimal Phoenix list has been made yet. And that's kind of why I've held off on like writing a Phoenix primer. I'm gonna do some matches against Phoenix in March. I've already got that on the schedule. And then after that, I'll write up something. But I feel like the lists week to week are still changing quite a bit. I don't think we've quite reached that point where, the Phoenix deck is stock. I don't think we're there yet. All right, so this is a real question. Does D&T need to add Chrome Mox? As is obvious by me registering this deck, right now I feel like Fast, Strong, Hate is in a great place. So like Matt Zoll, for example, has been mucking around with this like Cleric Stompy deck, where he has the ability to like go turn 1 Arbiter or Thalia or Chalice of the Void, or lesser but Containment Priest in certain matchups as well. and I feel like that has performed very, very well. I think Fast Hate is very well positioned currently. And the thing is, I don't think D&T wants to play Chrome Mox, but there very well might be an argument to be playing something like White Eldrazi that can play either Chrome Mox or Mox Diamond to accelerate the same stuff out quicker. I think adding Chrome Mox to D&T has some weird deck building issues inherent in it that I'm not going to go into this because I kind of want to keep this Red Prison focused. I think this strategy resembles Red-Black Reanimator a lot. Do you agree? Yes, I totally understand what you mean by that. And let me make that just kind of clear to everyone else. Red-Black Reanimator often goes all in on turn 1, but they're going all in on sort of like a combo. Whereas I am going relatively all in on a control card. And both of those are relatively game-winning with probably appropriate win percentages attached to them. Like, you know, when your Red-Black Reanimator opponent gets to go like Dark Ritual, Entomb, Exhume, or something like that, they win a vast majority of those games. Similarly, when I go, you know, Ancient Tomb, Spirit Guide, Blood Moon, those games often end or almost end on the spot. So yeah, I totally see what you're saying there. Ooh, Crypt. So that's sort of interesting. Turn 2 hate is slow against some of the decks of the format right now. Red-Black Reanimator, for example, a lot of times your turn 2 hate, especially when you're on the draw, is not good enough. Similarly, a lot of times if your ant-opponent goes turn 1 discard, turn 2 combo off, your Thalia might not be good enough. Palace Jailer. I'm gonna scan what I played against. So in my 10 rounds, I played against one deck with Force of Will. The only deck I played against with Force of Will was a blue-white-red Delver Blade deck. And I think I lost a game where they had Stoneforge Mystic and Double Force, and then I won the other 2 games. Losing a card to Force of Will is actually not the end of the world. So the general strategy with this deck is slam the first thing on the table. Does it work? No. Okay, I'm going to try again and again and again. So say you lead on something like Mountain, Chrome Mox, Spirit Guide, Blood Moon, or something like that, and it relatively exhausts your resources. You still just then start top decking all of this stuff, and you play them out turn after turn after turn. So even if you lose the first hate piece and the first hate piece doesn't work, that's oftentimes fine because you have a blistering clock that you can top deck relatively consistently, and that's okay. I guess I should talk about one other thing here. I've really been focusing on my 3 drops tonight, but these cards deserve some praise too. With the matchups that I got playing in basically mono combo, combo, what was it, 8 out of 10 rounds? Yeah, so I played against Loam and blue-white-red Delver Blade. Yeah, combo 8 of my 10 rounds, I'm singing the praises of these, but when you get paired against Miracles or Grixis Control or something like that, these are the cards that let you grind and are really annoying to answer, and these carry those matchups. Why didn't you play Snow-Covered Mountains? I forgot. I'll level with you. It's a clear deck building mistake. I just didn't do it. I grabbed Budikov's deck list and uploaded it to Moto, and I was very convinced that I wanted to play 74 of the 75. And I went back and forth on the Grafdigger's Cage, and then I just whacked the submit button. I didn't think about it until after I had already submitted the list. But yeah, clear mistake. Should be a split of Snow-Covered Mountains and Mountains. All right, chat. Any other questions for me? Alright, yeah, okay. So, short version of why I chose to play the deck is I thought combo was going to be overly represented this weekend, just kind of like based on where the metagame was at. And this deck hates on combo much, much harder than Death and Taxes does. Is the red deck like a tier 1 choice or just a good meta choice deck? I would be confident in saying that it is probably a tier 1 deck. I think it is very good right now in a world of like a heavily combo and control dominated metagame. And I think this will be a great choice probably for the next month or two. You know, obviously things in Legacy are cyclical, but like I am not the most accomplished red prison pilot, and it was very clear that I didn't have to be. The hands sometimes play themselves when like you just get to do the most degenerate possible things. Like that game one I showed you where like I made what was it, like a Chandra and a Chalice on turn one? Like it's crazy. That's not to say there weren't very difficult decisions. There were. There were some incredibly difficult mulligan and sideboarding decisions. But I think the deck's great. Why is combo so popular online? Because it's very easy to queue quickly and grind leagues with combo. How do you mulligan with the deck generally, and what do you usually take out? A sideboard guide would be awesome. The Goat Boys, on the source, Zach Turgian posted a sideboard guide relatively recently. But to just talk about some generic things, a lot of times you board out the same sorts of cards. So against a lot of your like fair matchups, like say something like D&T, a lot of times you end up like pulling this set of 8 cards at the same time because like they just don't necessarily do a ton against a fair game plan. So this is a set of 8 cards that you commonly pull. This is a set of 8 cards that you commonly pull when your opponent is just like good against basic, or is fine against Blood Moon and has plenty of basics. And then oftentimes your 4-drops are trimmed. Not necessarily cutting all of them, but against the faster matchups, like a lot of times like you don't have time to play these cards. Fiery Confluence being the one that you keep around the most just because it finishes your opponent. But a lot of times these 6 cards often get boarded out for just being too slow. As far as boarding in goes, against your graveyard decks, you have these 5 easy. Against your combo decks, a lot of times you end up boarding in like Hanowar Garrison and the Scab Clan Berserkers as a package, just to get more aggression and to get some of the slower cards out of the deck. One thing you have to consider is that sometimes you board in Sulfur Elemental just as a 3/2 creature in a matchup where, like, say your Chalices, Transfers, Moons, or Blood Moons are like all bad. A lot of times you end up just boarding in a bunch of like medium power level stuff in order to replace the worst cards in the deck. What are you playing next? So on Wednesday, I will be playing an Electro Dominance deck. Yeah, I know. It's Caleb Smith's deck list. He's gonna, well, he already sent it to me. It's a weird one. So it's going to use Electro Dominance and As Foretold to cast Restore Balance and Ancestral Visions. It's gonna be something. So that's gonna happen Wednesday. All right, sorry, Lord Darkview. I think I missed your question. Do you think Red Prison is positioned to be a format pillar, or is it more of a format safety valve for when things just head in a strange combo heavy way? No, the Goat Boys, that will be in Legacy. Okay, so I think that Chalice of the Void decks are a staple of the format. I think which Chalice of the Void deck is best at any given time varies a little bit. Right now, we're in a position where, you know, Blood Moon effects are relatively good, especially with all of the depths running around online. So this is the best prison deck right now. Or I think I should say this is probably the best Chalice deck right now. There's other times where you drift more in the direction of like Miracles and Grixis Control are both really popular, and then you might want to play something like the big Eldrazi deck, like the Eldrazi Post deck, because what are they going to do about your 11 drop? Not things. It just doesn't work. And then there's other times where just having the early aggression of traditional like Eldrazi Stompy is going to be better than this. But I would expect sort of like indefinitely Chalice of the Void will be a staple of the format. Like I think that just like kind of the way things that are trending right now, I don't expect Chalice to be going anywhere. Would you recommend Cage going forward? No. What would you replace it with? I'd consider a Braid, Sorceress Spyglass, Third Ensnaring Bridge, Lotus Petal, Goblin Crater Maker, those sorts of cards. Where do you think Stompy is better versus Post? Where Blood Moon gets free wins. If I just oversimplify. And where you need more early aggression. So if you need to close a game quickly after playing your hate piece, this deck is just going to be superior to Eldrazi Post. If once you play your hate piece, you can drag things on and like go for inevitability, then Eldrazi Post is going to be better. Is this a result of the lack of Delver decks pushing combo down? Potentially. I haven't seen as much Delver as I might expect right now, given the prevalence of combo, but maybe the combo decks are well suited towards bullying on whatever version of Delver is popular right now. I still think Grixis Delver is very popular, relatively speaking. Like it's probably like 5 or 6% of the metagame. But I don't think we're in like a Delver dominated time. I don't think Delver is necessarily like the best deck. Probably still top tier, but I don't think it's the best thing that people can be doing. So I think another thing that's contributing to it is I think a lot of people are mucking around with new Delver builds and the dust hasn't quite settled on that yet. So I've been seeing people experimenting with like blue-red Delver featuring Pteramander, I can never remember which one it is. I think it's Pteramander. I've seen some people experimenting with like, I always mix up Light Up the Stage and the other spectacle card. But the one that lets you effectively draw some cards, you exile them and then can play them. I've seen some experimentation with that. I've seen some people trying Death Shadow again to mixed results. Yeah, so yes, Light Up the Stage is the one that I was thinking of then. Do you have an example of matchups where like Post versus Stompy versus Red Prison changes a ton? I mean, let's take something like Ant, for example. If you're playing against Ant, once you have the hate piece, you would really like to close the game quickly before they go and draw something like an Echoing Truth or Abrupt Decay to get rid of your hate piece. So that's an example where like playing something like Eldrazi or Red Prison where you can close the game much more quickly is better than playing something like Eldrazi Post that's a bit slower to get the goldfish. Yeah, Skewer the Critics is seeing a lot of play in Burn. That card has real potential. I don't know that like Burn is tier 1 or even close to it, but Burn definitely got better. And I have not played many matches versus newer configurations of Burn. It's very possible that some of the traditional knowledge about Burn matchups is going to change a lot. And that's kind of like what I'll say about that. All right, I've more or less exhausted everything I want to say. All right, let's take one final round of chat questions. You have anything else for me? I got a notification a second ago. Kutabilly99, thank you very much for following. And X Gimps X, thank you for following as well. I missed you earlier on. All right, I hope this was helpful. This wasn't really something I intended on doing, as I kind of thought that it wouldn't be good content because so many of my matches were just like, all right, I played Blood Moon and then Gravel Master. My opponent died. But hopefully that at least like showed off the power level of the deck and why I was interested in doing this. So, all right, I got a couple more questions filtering in. All right, is there any considerations for playing the slower prison builds of red with main deck bridge over the Stompy variant? Yes, but they play out as slightly different decks. So the one with like main deck bridges and more planeswalkers is going to play more like a control deck, whereas I feel more like a Stompy deck. Like I feel like hate piece plus clock, whereas the other version will feel more like hate piece into slow lock over time. So the decks have a different feel. The more traditional version with the bridges will be much better against the mid-range stuff. So if we see a rise of Death and Taxes because people start playing Red Prison, then it would be better to go back to the traditional build. Because let me tell you, Goblin Rabble Master and Legion Warboss, real bad against Batterskull. When they gain 4 life a turn by attacking and gain 4 life when your little idiots are forced to attack into them, it's rough. Did you use Garrison? Yes, Garrison was great. Not so great that I wanted in the main deck, but just having a 9th one of these effects in the sideboard that I can bring in when my main deck cards aren't good, it was very useful. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call it here for tonight. I will be back on Wednesday with some very ridiculous suspend cards that we're not actually going to suspend. So you'll see Electro Dominance and As Foretold on this channel on Wednesday. All right, if you're enjoying this content and you want to follow me and support me, I would really appreciate that. And if you're really enjoying my content, please consider doing something like a donation Decklist or subscribing to my channel to support my content. I'm going to go ahead and turn you over to Arkin, who will be playing some sort of Legacy. I'm not sure what he's going to be playing today. So thank you all for joining me in my tournament recap, and thank you so much for your support. I had a lot of really kind words and a few rubs about not playing Death and Taxes in this challenge. And that was really fun to read today. So thank you all, and have a good evening.